Welcome back guys to another video about Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Today I will show you an in-depth guide about arrows and arrow damage, and I found some huge new revelations about it. And especially if you're a warrior player or assassin player who only shoots arrows from time to time, then this guide has the potential to change your approach on which arrows you really want to use. The game has 6 different arrow types: normal arrows which only cost 1 wood, then paralyzing arrows, poison arrows, fire arrows, and the arrows which cost the most resources to craft are the explosive arrows and the death arrows. You can actually activate the Autocraft button here for the normal arrows, but sadly that is not available for the other arrows. But I will show you a trick how to autocraft poison and fire arrows later in the video. You can unlock all the other arrow types from your abilities. The Arrow Master ability with 1 point unlocks the paralyzing arrow, with 2 points it unlocks fire and poison, and with 3 points it also unlocks your explosive arrows. Normal arrows and death arrows are available right at the start. There are some people claiming that death arrows or other arrows have more range than normal arrows. That is totally incorrect. All arrow types have the exact same range and the exact same flight path. Every fully charged arrow I shoot from this roof will exactly land in the same position at the bottom of the staircase at the tavern. Only the arrows which I do not fully charge will land before that spot. So your range solely depends on your state of charge and not on your arrow type. So no matter which arrow type I use, it's always the same trace, it's the same spot where they go down. You can see it best with the explosive and the fire arrows, of course, because there's that burning fire at the same position every time. And even the death arrows have the same trace, and when we zoom in we will see the red death arrow trace, and it will also land in the same spot. So also the death arrows have the same range. Okay, but what about damage? Let's first check out the normal arrows. For all my tests I was using the modified Zeus build with added invincibility glitch, so that was 149,000 warrior damage converted into hunter damage. That gave me around 1.36 million. And then with the paralyzing arrows I also hit about the same 1.37 million. So even in lots of further tests there was no difference between normal arrows and paralyzing arrows. They deal the exact same amount of damage. Then I wanted to check out the poison arrows, and of course I made sure I have 0% additional poison damage. The common belief until this day was, at least for me, that without having additional poison damage or additional fire damage, elemental arrows will deal the exact same amount of damage than normal arrows. But that was not the case. Even in my first hit I got well over 1.4 million. I kept playing around with the poison arrows a bit, and I always got higher results with the poison arrows than with the normal arrows, even without any additional poison damage. So there was really something into it. So the difference a poison arrow made was around 5% additional damage, without even using any other modifier or increase. The next thing I wanted to try if the fire arrows had the same amount of 5% increase. So I changed the build here, I removed all the fire damage percent, and after around 30 minutes of creating the exact same mastery point and build with 0% fire damage, then I immediately got a 1.44 million damage fire arrow shot. And that was also easily repeatable. While with normal arrows I would not even scratch to 1.4 million damage, with fire arrows that was as easy as with poison arrows. Here with another 1.4 million damage easily in the second try. Of course there's a big deviation and randomness depending on how good you hit the head, from which side you hit the head, so you can end up with random 1.3 million damage hits. But in general, when you make a lot of hits you will see the same 5% damage increase, the same damage increase as for poison arrows over normal and paralyzing arrows. But as you know, there are other ways to use poison and fire arrows. First of all, we can simply activate flaming attacks and use normal arrows. They will then also start burning. So I tried if normal arrows that just simply start burning are also dealing the same amount of damage. Flaming attacks and venomous attacks do not add any additional damage. Only fire mastery and poison mastery will do that. So we have still 0% of damage, and we use normal arrows now. I was easily able to reproduce the 1.44 million damage hits with flaming attacks ability as well as with the venomous attacks ability. Then I also tried to engrave permanent poison damage or permanent fire damage on my bow, and that also lead to easily getting 1.4 million damage with both of these abilities. So it did totally not matter in which way I activated the fire or poison damage. I could have used the venomous attacks, the flaming attacks, I could have used the normal fire arrows or poison arrows, I could have used the engraving on my bow, or I could simply use the normal fire or poison arrows. Every time I got a 5% damage increase over normal and paralyzing arrows. Then I also tried out the death arrows, and I could easily get 1.5 million damage in the very first hits. And it was very easy to see, even in all the other hits I made, that I never got below 1.4 million damage. And the highest was 1.5 million damage at its peak. So death arrows have a 10% damage increase over normal and paralyzing arrows. So that's a double amount of damage increase than normal fire or poison arrows. And the question is, when will fire and poison arrows surpass the death arrows? How much fire and poison damage do I need that fire and poison arrows become better than death arrows? So I started to make some attempts and just activated the fire mastery and got 40% additional fire damage. And I easily got around 1.43 million, 1.46 and even ended up with 1.47 million damage. So I went back into the menu and added the 20% additional fire damage in the fire mastery to it. Already in the first attempt with 60% additional fire damage or elemental damage, I scored around 1.5 million damage and I scored around this damage consistently. I was even able to get over 1.53 million damage. I also tried it out with over 80% fire damage and that gave me easily more damage than the death arrows. I scored easily 1.54 or 1.55 million damage. So in order to get more damage with elemental arrows than with death arrows, you have to have at least 60% elemental damage. Better you have more than that. Otherwise you could simply use the death arrows and get the same results. And that is crucial, because with fire damage you can easily get 40% fire damage from fire mastery, but with poison damage you only get 25% poison damage from poison mastery. So that is a lot less damage, and it will not be enough to surpass the effect of death arrows when you only go for the masteries and for the ability for poison damage. So for poison damage to get better than death arrows, you have to use another poison damage engraving in your build. Otherwise you will not reach the 60% minimum required to surpass the death arrows value. And it even questions if we really have to use fire arrows to get the most damage. We could simply use death arrows as long as we have no more than 60% elemental damage in our build. But there's one arrow type I haven't spoken about yet, which are the explosive arrows, because the explosive arrows are total crap in this game. They totally suck. Look at what they do. They cannot crit. Whatever you do, explosive arrows cannot crit. And in a crit build, they are totally useless. They deal like 20,000 damage here, and even the fire damage after that is more damage than the impact damage. That is also the reason why I never spend 3 points on Arrow Master, because I do not need the explosive arrows. So are elemental arrows really the best? Well, that depends on your build. If you have less than 60% fire or poison damage, then death arrows would deal more damage. And there are also some enemy types like mercenaries which are resistant versus fire or versus poison damage. So on these enemies you will deal significantly less damage with elemental arrows. And especially the mythical creatures are the biggest elemental tanks in the game. They absorb 50% of the damage when you use any elemental attack. So never use any elemental arrows, no fire arrows, no poison arrows and no fire sword, no poison sword against mythical creatures. But in any other case and with more than 60% elemental damage, absolutely go for them. I also promised you a trick to autocraft poison and fire arrows. Well, it's not really a trick, but when you autocraft normal arrows, you can simply use the engraving on your bow to convert normal arrows into fire arrows or normal arrows into poisonous arrows. Then you will never run out of them, because you still use your normal arrows and the engraving converts it to the other arrow type. That is a really convenient trick to use, but it also uses up one of your engraving slots for very valuable engravings. There's actually also a bow in the game that reduces your consumption of special arrows up to 50%. So you could use that engraving also, and then additionally you can go for an additional 25% reduction to consume special arrows in your masteries. So in total you can get up to 75% reduction to consume special arrows. That's especially useful if you have not so much materials even in the beginning. I would agree that autocrafting fire or poison arrows with the engraving is much better. Unless you want to use the engravings to avoid the consumption of death arrows, for example. One last trick especially new players are not always aware of is that you can always use your paralyzing arrows to recruit new lieutenants. You don't have to knock out them, you can simply shoot paralyzing arrows to mercenaries which have legendary perks on them, so you can recruit these valuable mercenaries very easily. You don't have to sneak around, knock them out, just use your paralyzing arrows for that. So I hope you learned something from this video, and I hope you also busted a lot of myths here in this tutorial. Please don't forget to subscribe, leave me a like, and see you next time.